What's going on, guys, and welcome to the 30-second episode of the Warcry Podcast. I'm your host, Yehola Tiger. This episode is going to dive into some conspiracy. You know, I like to add a little conspiracy spice to everything that I talk about. But this episode is going to be about the 27 Club. The 27 Club is a group of celebrities who have passed. Either due to weird circumstances, dare I say, maybe freak accidents, or just, do their own self-destruction. But there's quite a bit of lists, and I'm going to hit the high points. I know that there's some people, I know I'm going to mention some people that are not as well known, but like they were around during that time, and they passed away at 27. So I'm going to start from the beginning. There was a French, I guess he was a pianist, and I cannot remember his name. It was like Alexander, but it's French. He was the first member of the 27 Club. He passed away back, I think, in the 1800s. But the second, and by the way, if you hear me do my voice, I'm losing it, and so I'm trying to power through this episode. This is what this podcast means to me. I'm powering through losing my voice from all this talking that I do in my daily life. And so this is episodes for you, for the people out there that have ever lost their voice. This is for you. Anyways, so we'll hit the well-known 27 Club members, but Robert Johnson, and that's one thing about Robert Johnson is he has been an influence, through the Rolling Stones. I know Muddy Waters was a big kind of a bluegrass, not really bluegrass, but more blues, artist. But Robert Johnson in August 1938, just a few months after his birthday, he made moves on the owner of this juke joint that he was playing at, and basically he was drinking and having a good time, and the owner kept sliding him kind of a drink, but it had poison in it. And as the night went on, he ended up getting sauced out, and then 3 days later he ends up dying due to poisoning and pneumonia. Did I even say that right? Pneumonia? Anyways. But he's buried in an unmarked grave in Mississippi. And one thing about Robert Johnson that everybody talks about is that he was one of the worst guitar players. Like, he was like straight trash. He couldn't make no songs. His rhythm was off. He just was not a great guitarist. And I believe back in the 60s or 70s, there was an interview from a buddy of his that was around him at that time, and he was describing him as as an artist, and he just wasn't good at all. And he's like, man, this guy, he was always thinking he was good, but then he left. And they said he left for like a few months, anywhere from 3 to 6 months. And he came back and he was good. And he told everybody, he said, I went to the crossroads and got good. Well, everybody knows, if you make a deal with the devil or an entity or a spirit like that, you got to repay it in some way. And that's kind of the tone that we're going to have throughout this entire episode. Because, once you get into that lifestyle and you're basically making deals with people who, people always say deal with the devil, but really it's deals with people that don't have your best interest at heart. And so as we kind of make down this list, Brian Jones, as you guys heard in the trailer, he died by drowning. And, kind of a little piece from the Rolling Stone magazine, as it's clear it seems the death of Brian Jones has been one of the most persistent mystery in rock and roll, with many people questioning the official version of what happened. Even members of the Rolling Stones have expressed doubt. And still, this is a quote from Keith Richards, and still the mystery of his death hasn't been solved. And I don't know what happened, but there was some nasty business going on. Now, Brian Jones was staying at the house of I believe it was the writer of Winnie the Pooh. Now, the writer of Winnie the Pooh, the original, had some dark dealings, and Brian Jones was one of the founding members, and he was kicked out of Rolling Stones when they first got going. And there, some say in the conspiracy realm that this was a blood sacrifice for the Stones to be able to take off to where they went. With the singles of "Gimme Shelter" and all these other different singles that they had and hits that they had. They say that this Brian Jones, he was, like I said, an original member, but it was a sacrifice for them to be able to move on. And now Keith Richards and Mick Jagger, have, you guys, I mean, if you do some Google searches, you can find different stories of people saying that they dabbled in those things and did those things, that occult type things. And that's one thing, kind of a misconception about the occult. That means to hide. And so with everything about the occult, you have to show your hand. And so with that being said, going back to Brian Jones and Rolling Stones, that could have, his death could have been a springboard to launch the Stones into a different stratosphere and make them the band that they are today. Alan Wilson, he was a musician, and I, for the life of me, cannot remember. I want to say he was with the Stooges, but he had basically this weird habit of sleeping outdoors, and he was at the vocalist of Bob Haidt. He was at his house in L.A. Now, this is a weird one. So basically, he found his body in the vocalist Haidt's yard, September 3rd, 1970, and his hands were crossed on his chest, and there was a bottle of barbiturates next to his side. And people always say that it's an accidental overdose, but a lot of people say it's suicide. Now, another conspiracy is that, like I said, they needed that sacrifice because he had so many issues, and it's like, we can just blame an overdose. And the Stooges, went on to be a pretty big band in the 70s. So this is very interesting, with this 27 Club. We hit the high points, and we hit the trio here of Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and Jim Morrison. Now, one thing about all three of these is they all wanted eventually to get out of music. Now, Janis Joplin, I think, was trying to record her farewell album, or farewell single. Jimi Hendrix wanted out of his contract, and he wanted away from the music industry, and he was so tired of it. And then Jim Morrison also obviously fled to Paris, France, and died in a bathtub. And so, with these three, and the whole, and you guys can, eventually I may talk about Laurel Canyon, because there's some CIA connections, basically that these three were involved in this Laurel Canyon about sex, drug, and rock and roll, and hippies, and LSD, and, everybody has a good time. And that we do know it is a fact that the CIA was involved in this, and that handlers were involved in these three people here. Another kind of weird thing is that Jim Morrison's dad, if you guys have heard of the Gulf of Tonkin, that was basically a CIA operation that got us into Vietnam, and his dad was the fleet commander for that ship. Essentially, what the Gulf of Tonkin is they said that they allegedly that we were attacked, by, outside forces that, were involved in Vietnam, and that caused us to get into the war. And they said, we got to, they attacked us in neutral waters. It's time to go after them. And so his dad was involved in that. He was a CIA operative in the military that had military ties and all that stuff. Now, Jimi Hendrix, in the early hours of Friday, September 18th, 1970, while staying with his girlfriend in London, he took some sleeping pills, and Jimi Hendrix was known just to take things. Like I said, it's that free spirit, now I'm not saying taking drugs makes you free spirit, I ain't saying that. But what I'm saying is that they just lived, they just lived. They didn't really, what happened to him, consequences didn't matter. And that's that Laurel Canyon LSD hippie thing that they had going on. Well, the drug that he took was another strong barbiturate, and he ended up passing away. Well, like I said, he wanted out of his contract, and it was very well known that he was wanting out of the music business. And one thing that conspiracy theorists with these three in particular is they always talk about the threes. So if you look at the history, there's always people that die in threes and they're celebrities. For instance, I'll give you an example, and I can't remember the third person in this, but it was Michael Jackson, Farrah Fawcett, and then there was another person that had passed. You look at, you look at different celebrity deaths. You can type in, a celebrity who has passed, and there's always another one. Maybe not well known, maybe not, the biggest star, but they have passed along with that person on either on the same day, the day before, the day after. And that's one thing we may get into that. Like that's some Illuminati music industry things, but they always happen in threes. And one thing about these three, they all died within months of each other, within a year. And so, it's kind of crazy. But Janis Joplin, they say that she died of an overdose, but her friend, her lover came out years later. I want to say maybe 2000s, but essentially said that they believe that she didn't OD, that she tripped and hit her head and basically killed her, like by accident, because she was so drugged out that she just tripped over the rug and basically snapped her neck and died. And so that's you can always they say maybe a sense of foul play with that. Like I said, with those three, those are the the big three that everybody kind of looks at. One of them, kind of a lesser known one, is Ron McKiernan, and he was one of the founders of Grateful Dead. He passed on their rise, and that's another kind of conspiracy that they got to cut the weakest link, and and then obviously you guys know the Grateful Dead, had a really big run, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Dave Alexander, he basically drank himself to death and died of a pulmonary edema. This is Dave Alexander, who was in the Stooges, and basically died at 27. Now, if you guys have listened to a past episode, I did a Kurt Cobain episode where we talk about the conspiracy that Courtney Love killed Kurt Cobain. And I believe that she did. Allegedly. So nobody gets in trouble here. But here's something that's very interesting, and I want to add to that lore and to that mystery, I guess you could say. Kurt Cobain's body was found by an electrician on Friday, April 8th, 1994. Now, Courtney Love, at the time of his death, had accused Kurt of cheating on her with and having an affair with one of her bandmates. This bandmate, her name was Kristen Paff. Now, Paff was the bassist in her band Hole, and she was shown on TV at the memorial, very upset, of Kurt Cobain's passing. Now, this is something that is not really talked about, but she passed away due to a drug overdose around Courtney Love a few months after Kurt. And that's something that's kind of interesting, because if she was accused of having an affair with Courtney Love's husband, Kurt Cobain, and she passes away 2 months later, that's very interesting. We can chalk that up to something kind of strange. And so that adds to the conspiracy that could happen, because how is she going? Is she was she in love with Kurt and it just overwhelmed her and she just took drugs and died? But I don't know. that's a very interesting kind of another wrinkle to that. One of my favorite, she was a crush of mine up until like she passed, obviously. But Amy Winehouse, she's a part of the 27 Club. She died in 2011. She drank herself to death. And one thing about Amy Winehouse that she had done quite a bit is she had blamed the devil for making her the way she was. And she, would talk about occult things in her music. And so she had some, very, kind of very strange things in some of her music videos. And she's had been attached to having sold her soul, because she basically came out of nowhere with a beautiful voice, and she became this huge star, which couldn't handle it. And I would equate her to the Kurt Cobain syndrome, where it's like, dude, I really didn't want to be famous. I'm just writing songs. I'm making music. And the final guy, and he's the latest one, is Anton Yelchin. He was in Fright Night with Colin Farrell. He died in a freak accident, and I was reading an article basically said this is basically impossible, that there's no way this could have happened. And it was just like a weird occurrence of his car basically pinned him against against the gate, and somehow he ended out of the vehicle in very strange fashion. And so, the 27 Club, a lot of people kind of make fun of it, and they don't, really believe in the conspiracy and the Illuminati and the music industry, but those things are very real. And everything that that I mentioned in this episode can be researched and can be picked apart. And one thing I like about my show is that sometimes you've got to believe is the truth stranger than fiction, or is fiction just fiction. And so that's something, that is always very interesting to me when, I come across, these small topics like this, in mentioning them is, we talk about things that are not normal and not, I guess you could say mainstream. But you guys can follow me on TikTok. I think it's Warcry Pod on TikTok. So one thing too is I'm doing a little bit of dare I say rebranding, but I would not say rebranding. I have a TikTok that's dedicated to the podcast. TikTok is Warcry Pod. Twitter is One Man Band 918. I do now have an Instagram. It's Warcry Pod, or at Warcry Pod on Instagram. We're gaining followers every day, and I appreciate everybody that has followed. I've been trying to we've been trying to keep cool posts and things like that on there, and I appreciate everybody that has been reaching out about telling stories. I know This Is Creepy Part 3 is coming. Send your stories. I have an email for the pod too. I want you guys to be aware of. It's realwarcrypod@gmail.com. I'll put that in the link. And you guys heard my voice crack. It's going. I'm telling you, it's going. But we're almost at we're almost at, I believe, almost 6,000 audio listens. And so I appreciate everybody that listens. It really means a lot, and I'll catch you on the next one.